Did you ever wonder what kept the crowned heads of Europe up at night between 1000 and 1500 AD? What desperate measures did medieval queens resort to, beyond political alliances and strategic marriages, to secure their power, their lineage, and their very lives? What strange, forgotten beliefs guided their most intimate decisions, far from the grand courts and public pronouncements? Number 8. The gruesome fertility, elixirs. The pressure on a medieval queen was immense, almost crushing. Her primary, unspoken duty, often more crucial than anything else, was to produce an heir, preferably a male one. Queen without a living son was a queen, constantly on shaky ground, her position precarious, her very existence at court a silent accusation. This relentless anxiety drove many royal women and their advisors to embrace beliefs and practices that seem utterly bizarre to modern sensibilities. When prayers to saints and pilgrimages did not seem to yield the desired result, some queens turned to substances deemed to hold sympathetic magic, often involving ingredients that would curdle the blood of those living centuries. One such deeply held belief centered on the power of animal parts, particularly those associated with potency, longevity, or prolific reproduction. The concept was rooted in the idea that consuming a part of an animal would transfer its characteristic to the consumer. For a queen desperate for a child, this meant seeking out ingredients believed to possess extreme fertility. Imagine the desperate whispers in royal chambers, the furtive consultations with apothecaries and alchemists, as these elaborate concoctions were prepared. Dried womb of a hare, a creature known for its rapid breeding, might be ground into a fine powder and mixed into a queen's wine or bread. The testes of a boar, potent symbols of male virility, could be similarly processed and secretly administered. There was a pervasive belief that the raw, untamed essence of these animals, when ingested, could somehow awaken dormant life within a queen's body. The use of powdered animal organs was not limited to these examples. Concept extended to other creatures thought to embody life-giving properties. The heart of a lion, symbolizing courage and strength, or the liver of a wolf, often associated with vitality, were not necessarily for fertility, but for bestowing other desired traits. However, for the purpose of conception, the focus remained on the reproductive organs or parts of animals with a known high reproductive rate. A queen might secretly consume these parts, perhaps disguised in a sweet syrup or a rich stew, hoping that the very essence of fertility would infuse her being. Beyond animal parts, some beliefs extended to more macabre ingredients, though these were perhaps less common among queens than in the wider population, given the access to other learned remedies. The concept of mummy powder was for a time a surprisingly widespread medicinal ingredient in Europe, believed to hold curative properties, derived from the ancient embalmed bodies. While primarily used for ailments, the idea of consuming a part of something that had defied decay, that had retained its form for millennia, could easily morph into beliefs about preserving life, or indeed, creating it. Queen, advised by a physician steeped in such lore, might have been presented with such a substance, its origins obscured, its supposed powers magnified by secrecy and desperation. The medieval wear-you did not separate medicine from magic as rigidly as later eras would. What was considered a cure often involved an element of ritual, a touch of the supernatural. For a queen struggling with infertility, every avenue was explored. Take, for instance, the belief in dragon's blood, which was not actually from a mythical beast, but a resin from certain plants. It was often mixed into remedies, sometimes for wounds, sometimes for its supposed mystical properties. While not directly linked to fertility in its primary use, the potent symbolism of such an ingredient, its rarity and exotic origin, made it a prime candidate for inclusion in any potion aimed at achieving extraordinary results. The very name invoked power, ancient strength and the ability to overcome the impossible. Consider the atmosphere of a royal court: constant surveillance, intricate political maneuvers, and the ever-present shadow of succession. Queen's private struggles with fertility were often public knowledge, whispered about in the great halls and discussed openly in the council chambers. Her perceived failure to produce an heir could weaken her husband's position, embolden rivals, and even lead to her repudiation. In such a high-stakes environment, the pressure to conceive was not just personal. It was a matter of dynastic survival. This extreme pressure fostered an environment where even the most unusual or gruesome practices were not dismissed outright, but rather embraced with a desperate hope. For example, though specifics are often scarce in historical records regarding such intimate and secret practices, the courts of queens like Catherine of Aragon, who famously struggled to produce a male heir for King Henry VIII of England. While Catherine was known for her piety and devotion to traditional religious practices, the sheer longevity of her struggle and the mounting political pressure would have made any option, however unconventional, appear worth pursuing. Though not explicitly documented, the pervasive nature of these beliefs in the wider medieval and early modern periods suggests that few, if any, royal households would have been entirely immune to them. The knowledge of such practices passed down through generations of court physicians and wise women would have been part of the hidden curriculum of royal life. The efficacy of these elixirs was, of course, a matter of belief, not empirical science. Yet in a world without modern medicine, where the mysteries of conception were attributed to divine will or cosmic alignment, such practices offered a sense of agency, a tangible action a queen could take in the face of overwhelming pressure. The hope, the ritual, and the sheer force of desire itself may have provided a psychological comfort, even if the physical ingredients offered no true assistance. For the medieval queen, these gruesome fertility elixirs were not just potions. They were desperate prayers in liquid form, a plea for the one thing that could secure her legacy and her life: a healthy heir. Number 7. The potent power of gemstones and amulets. In the glittering courts of medieval Europe, where wealth and power were openly displayed, gemstones were far more than mere decorations. For medieval queens, these precious stones and the amulets crafted from them were believed to possess potent magical and protective properties, imbued with powers ranging from healing and warding off evil to ensuring safe childbirth and even influencing affairs of the heart. The belief in the inherent power of minerals was deeply rooted in the medieval mind, drawing from ancient lore, biblical references, and evolving alchemical theories. A queen's jewel collection was not just a symbol of her status. It was a carefully curated arsenal of protective charms. One of the most famous and highly prized of these magical stones was the bezoar stone. These remarkable concretions, found in the digestive systems of certain animals, typically goats or llamas, were believed to be universal antidotes to poison. In an era where poisoning was a constant threat, especially within the cutthroat world of royal courts, a queen possessing a bezoar stone was considered to be exceptionally safeguarded. Queen Elizabeth, the First of England, though from a later period, famously owned several, displaying them prominently as a deterrent to would-be assassins. Earlier medieval queens would have coveted them just as intensely. A queen might have a bezoar stone set into a ring or worn as a pendant, perhaps even grind a tiny sliver into her drink if she suspected foul play. The very presence of such a stone was believed to offer a powerful, silent defense against the most insidious forms of attack. Another stone of significant magical repute was the toadstone. Despite its unappealing name, this small gray stone was believed to be found inside the head of an old toad, though it was often a fossilized fish tooth. It was highly sought after for its purported ability to detect poison by sweating or changing color when near a toxic substance. Queens often wore toadstones set into rings not just for their beauty, but for their supposed life-saving capabilities. The stone was also believed to offer protection against the evil eye and to provide warmth and comfort in the cold medieval castles. The belief was that the stone absorbed the venom of the toad, thus transforming it into a powerful antidote, a concept of sympathetic magic, where poison neutralizes poison. Bloodstone, with its distinctive dark green color flecked with red spots, was another gem believed to possess formidable powers. It was particularly associated with stopping bleeding, a vital property in a time when even a minor cut could be fatal due to infection. Queens during childbirth, a notoriously dangerous event, might have had bloodstone placed nearby or even held it in their hand, believing it would aid in preventing excessive blood loss and ensure a smoother delivery. Beyond its medicinal uses, bloodstone was also thought to bring courage and strength, important qualities for a queen navigating complex political landscape. It was also sometimes associated with protection against deception and slander, a common peril in any royal court. The widespread belief in cramp rings also highlights the deep reliance on charmed objects. These rings, usually made from silver or gold, were believed to alleviate muscle cramps, epilepsy, and other ailments. Their power was thought to derive from their consecration by a reigning monarch, particularly on Good Friday. English monarchs from Edward the Confessor onward were believed to possess a divine healing touch, and the rings they blessed were considered especially potent. Queen, suffering from chronic pain or seizures, might wear several cramp rings, confident in their sacred origin and the monarch's blessing. These rings were not just fashion accessories. They were deeply personal and deeply spiritual objects, tangible links to divine power. Pearls, beyond their obvious beauty and value, were also believed to hold specific powers, particularly related to fertility. Queen desiring an heir might wear pearls, hoping they would promote conception and ensure a pure lineage. They were also associated with tears and sorrow, often worn as mourning jewelry, yet their primary magical association for queens revolved around their life-giving and protective qualities, especially during pregnancy. The lustrous, iridescent quality of pearls seemed to embody life and softness, making them ideal for the delicate state of pregnancy. The acquisition of these powerful stones was itself a complex affair. They might be gifts from foreign potentates, war spoils, or purchased from traveling merchants and alchemists who claimed to have sourced them from exotic lands. Each stone came with its own lore, its own set of instructions for use, and its own story. The court jewelers were not just craftsmen. They were often knowledgeable in the properties attributed to each gem, advising queens on which stone to wear for specific purposes. A queen might wear a sapphire for wisdom and protection, against envy and emerald, for foresight and fertility, or a ruby for passion and power. The superstitions surrounding gemstones were not isolated beliefs. They were interwoven with medical practices, religious devotion, and the anxieties of daily life. For a medieval queen whose life was constantly under scrutiny, and whose very existence was tied to the prosperity of her realm, the protection offered by these potent objects was invaluable. They provided a tangible sense of security, a hidden shield against seen and unseen threats. Whether worn openly for display or secretly against the skin, these amulets and gemstones were silent guardians, trusted companions in the dangerous and demanding world. Number 6. Astrology and the fateful stars. For medieval queens, the heavens were not just distant lights. They were a vast, intricate clockwork of divine will and earthly destiny. Astrology was not merely a parlor trick, but a serious, respected science, intricately woven into the fabric of medieval thought and decision-making. Royal courts across Europe employed court astrologers, scholars who meticulously charted the movements of planets and stars, believing that these celestial alignments held profound influence over human affairs. For a queen whose every move was a matter of state, consulting the stars was often as crucial as consulting her privy council. Every significant event in a queen's life, from her birth to her marriage, from the conception of an heir to the waging of war, was scrutinized through the lens of astrology. When a royal baby was born, one of the first acts would be for the astrologer to cast its natal chart, predicting its temperament, its health, and its future destiny. This chart would then guide decisions about the child's upbringing, education, and even potential marriage partners. The belief was that the position of the planets at the precise moment of birth imprinted certain characteristics and predetermined certain paths. Queen would eagerly await these predictions, seeking reassurance about her child's future, especially if it was a much-desired male heir. Marriage negotiations, often spanning years and involving multiple kingdoms, were frequently influenced by astrological considerations. Potential matches were not just assessed based on political alliances and dowries, but also on the compatibility of their astrological charts. Two individuals with clashing planetary alignments might be deemed ill-suited, regardless of other benefits, as it was believed their union would be fraught with misfortune. Queen, keenly aware of the importance of a harmonious royal marriage for dynastic stability, would have her own chart, and that of her prospective spouse, analyzed by the court astrologer. The timing of the wedding ceremony itself would also be chosen with extreme care, selecting a day and hour when the stars were most propitious for love, fertility, and prosperity. The conception of an heir was perhaps the most intensely scrutinized event. Queens and kings, desperate for sons, would often consult their astrologers to determine the most favorable times for conjugal relation. Specific days, and even hours, were advised based on the positions of the moon, Venus, and other planets believed to influence fertility and the gender of the child. It was a common belief that conceiving under certain planetary influences could increase the likelihood of a male birth or ensure the child would be strong and healthy. This placed an unusual burden on the royal couple, whose most intimate moments were dictated by the celestial calendar, all in the hope of securing the succession. Decisions of war and peace were also subject to astrological decree. Before a campaign was launched or a treaty signed, the astrologer would be tasked with identifying the most auspicious moment. Queens, though often not leading armies themselves, played a crucial role in these decisions through their influence on their husbands. They would have listened intently to the astrologer's readings, understanding that a misstep could lead to devastating consequences for their realm and their family. The alignment of Mars, the planet of war, or Jupiter, the planet of good fortune, could sway a queen's advice to her husband, potentially altering the course of history. Even daily life in the royal court could be influenced by astrology. There were auspicious days for travel, for receiving ambassadors, for hosting feasts, or even for cutting one's hair. Though a queen might not consult an astrologer for every trivial matter, the broader understanding of celestial influences pervaded the medieval mindset. She might avoid initiating a major project on a day when Saturn, the planet of ill fortune, was dominant, or choose a day ruled by Jupiter for a celebration. The influence of astrology extended to health and medicine. Astrological medicine, which linked different parts of the body and different diseases to specific planets and zodiac signs, was widely practiced. Queen, suffering from an ailment, might have her astrologer work with her physician to determine the best time for treatment, for bleeding, or for administering certain remedies. The belief was that the body was a microcosm reflecting the macrocosm of the heavens, and that healing required aligning with the celestial influences. Catherine de' Medici, Queen of France, in the 16th century, though slightly past the strict medieval cutoff, epitomizes the deep reliance on astrologers. She famously consulted Nostradamus, whose prophecies and astrological charts guided many of her political and personal decisions. Her life, marked by political intrigue and the desperate need to secure her children's reigns, shows how queens were prepared to lean heavily on a perceived wisdom of the stars. While earlier queens might not have had such a famous figure by their side, the role of the court astrologer was well established. For instance, The court of Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women of the High Middle Ages, would have certainly included such learned individuals, given her wide-ranging interests and her significant political influence. The medieval worldview saw the universe as an interconnected whole where celestial events directly impacted earthly affairs. For a queen whose very identity was intertwined with the stability and future of her kingdom, ignoring the wisdom of the stars would have been unthinkable. Astrology provided a framework for understanding destiny, for making sense of seemingly random events, and for attempting to gain an edge in a world full of uncertainty. It offered a sense of control, a belief that by understanding the cosmic rhythm, a queen could better navigate the tumultuous waters of royal life, ensuring the prosperity of her lineage and her realm. Number 5. Relics and royal healing rituals. In an era before modern medicine, when disease often struck swiftly and mercilessly, medieval queens, like everyone else, lived under the constant threat of illness and death. Yet they had access to extraordinary means of seeking health and protection. Chief among them, the veneration of holy relics and the practice of royal healing rituals. The belief that objects or persons touched by divine grace could cure ailments was deeply ingrained in the medieval Christian world, and queens, with their vast resources and spiritual prominence, were avid participants. Holy relics, fragments of the bodies of saints, pieces of their clothing or objects they had touched were considered to be infused with miraculous power. Every major cathedral and monastery boasted a collection of relics. Some genuine, many fabricated, all revered with fervent devotion. For a queen afflicted with illness or seeking protection from it, pilgrimage to a shrine housing a particularly potent relic was a common and deeply serious undertaking. The queen would travel often with a large retinue to places like Canterbury Cathedral, which held the relics of St. Thomas Becket, or to the shrine of St. James at Santiago de Compostela. There she would pray, offer donations, and often physically touch the reliquary, believing that the saint's power would flow into her, bringing healing or warding off affliction. Beyond distant pilgrimages, queens often owned personal relics. These could be small, portable objects, a bone fragment, a lock of hair, a piece of cloth set into beautiful reliquaries, often adorned with jewels. Queen might wear such a reliquary around her neck, keep it in her private chapel, or even place it on her body when suffering from a specific ailment. The belief was that the presence of the relic, even at a distance from its original source, retained the saint's healing grace. For instance, relics of the Virgin Mary, believed to be particularly efficacious for women's health and childbirth, would have been highly prized by queens seeking safe delivery of an heir. The royal touch was another profound healing ritual, specific to reigning monarchs. It was widely believed that the kings and queens of England and France possessed a miraculous ability to cure scrofula, a lymphatic disease often called the king's evil. The monarch would touch the afflicted individual, sometimes with a gold coin, and utter a prayer believing that their divinely ordained power could heal. While it was primarily the monarch who performed the touch, queens certainly participated in and witnessed these ceremonies. They understood the deep spiritual power attributed to their royal bloodline and their anointing. Queen might encourage her sick child to be touched by the king, or herself engage in supportive prayers during such a ritual, reinforcing the belief in the sacred nature of their rule. Queens also sponsored the acquisition and embellishment of relics for their own chapels and for public churches. This act of patronage was not just a display of piety or wealth. It was a strategic investment in spiritual capital. By bringing holy relics into her domain, a queen believed she was inviting divine favor and protection upon herself, her family, and her kingdom. The more powerful or numerous the relics, the greater the perceived spiritual shield. These reliquaries were often exquisitely crafted, reflecting the profound reverence and value placed upon their sacred contents. They were not merely containers, they were works of art and miraculous. The medieval understanding of illness was often rooted in spiritual rather than purely physical causes. Sickness could be seen as a punishment for sin, a test of faith, or even the work of malevolent forces. Therefore, spiritual remedies were often considered the most potent. For a queen, whose well-being was intrinsically linked to the health of the realm, seeking divine intervention through relics and rituals was not an act of desperation, but a fundamental duty. If the queen fell ill, it was not just a personal tragedy, but a cause for national concern, and every available means, both earthly and divine, would be employed for her recovery. Queens like Philippa of Hainaut, wife of King Edward III of England, were known for their devoutness and their patronage of religious institutions. While direct evidence of her personal use of specific relics for healing is scarce, her deep faith and the pervasive nature of these beliefs in her era would have meant that she relied heavily on such practices for her own health and the well-being of her numerous children. The chroniclers of the time often highlighted the piety of queens, as this was seen as a virtue that brought blessings upon the kingdom. The practice of seeking healing through relics and royal touch was a powerful demonstration of the intertwining of spiritual authority, political power, and personal belief in the medieval world. For medieval queens, these were not quaint superstitions, but vital components of their personal health care and spiritual well-being. They offered solace, hope, and a tangible connection to the divine in a world where medical knowledge was limited and the threat of disease was ever present. These rituals reinforced the sacred nature of monarchy and the belief that the divine actively intervened in the lives of both commoners and kings, providing a unique form of comfort and perceived protection to the most powerful women in the land. Number 4. Predicting the unborn. Bezoar gender divinations. The birth of a male heir was paramount for a medieval queen, often determining her continued influence, the stability of her marriage, and the very future of the dynasty. Pressure to produce a son was immense, bordering on obsessive. In an age without ultrasounds or genetic testing, the gender of an unborn child was a profound mystery, shrouded in hopeful anticipation and intense anxiety. This uncertainty fueled a host of bizarre divinatory practices, as queens and their advisors sought any sign, any hint that might reveal the sex of the royal progeny. These were not just curiosities. They were desperate attempts to gain insight into a matter of dynastic survival. One of the most widespread and enduring methods of gender divination involved observing the pregnant queen's physical characteristics. Folk beliefs held that a queen carrying a boy would carry high and tight, her belly appearing more pointed and less spread out. Conversely, a queen carrying a girl was thought to carry low and wide. The queen's complexion was also scrutinized. A glowing, unblemished skin was believed to indicate a male child, while a pale or spotty complexion suggested a female. Her overall demeanor was also a sign. If she seemed more vigorous and healthy, it pointed to a boy. If she seemed more fatigued or stole her beauty, it suggested a girl. Every subtle change in a queen's body became a potential clue, observed not just by her ladies-in-waiting but by the entire court. Adding to the immense pressure, beyond physical appearance, more active divinatory tests were employed. One common method involved the queen's urine. It was believed that observing the color and turbidity of the urine could reveal the baby's sex. Some methods even involved mixing the queen's urine with grain, such as wheat and barley. If the wheat sprouted first, it indicated a girl. If the barley sprouted first, a boy. This practice, though lacking any scientific basis, was rooted in ancient traditions and persisted throughout the medieval period. Imagine the tension as a queen awaited the results of such a simple yet profoundly significant test. Her future perhaps hanging on the growth of a few tiny sprouts. Dreams were also considered powerful omens. queen or those around her would pay close attention to her dreams during pregnancy. Dreams of weapons, horses, or strong male figures were interpreted as signs of a son. Dreams of jewels, flowers, or domestic scenes, on the other hand, might suggest a daughter. These interpretations were not rigid, but they fed into the queen's own anxieties and hopes, shaping her expectations. The power of dreams, often seen as messages from the divine or the subconscious, made them a compelling source of hidden knowledge. Rituals involving everyday objects also played a role. One practice involved suspending a ring, often the queen's wedding ring, over her pregnant belly. If the ring swung in a circular motion, it was believed to indicate a girl. If it swung back and forth in a straight line, a boy. This simple act, performed perhaps by a trusted lady or a wise woman, was a quiet moment of hopeful divination, a personal attempt to pierce the veil of the future. The weight and movement of the ring, seemingly guided by an unseen force, added to the mystique of the prediction. The sex of the child was not just a matter of curiosity. It carried enormous political weight. A male heir ensured the continuation of the dynasty, provided stability to the realm, and secured the queen's own position. A string of daughters, however, could lead to succession, crises, foreign claims to the throne, and even the repudiation of the queen for her perceived failure. Queens like Catherine of Aragon, who bore King Henry VIII of England only one surviving child, a daughter, Mary Tudor, faced immense pressure that ultimately led to the dissolution of her marriage and her downfall. Her court, and indeed the entire kingdom, would have been rife with such divinatory practices, desperately seeking any sign that a son was forthcoming. The belief that the mother's diet, activity, or even mental state could influence the child's gender also led to specific recommendations. Some advisors might suggest the queen eat specific foods, engage in particular activities, or even think certain thoughts, all with the hope of tipping the scales towards a male birth. While these were not direct divinations, they were part of the larger cultural fabric of trying to control or influence the seemingly uncontrollable aspects of conception and birth. For a medieval queen, whose life was lived under the constant glare of expectation, these gender divinations offered a tantalizing glimpse into the unknown. They provided a sense of proactive engagement, a feeling that something, anything, could be done to understand or even influence the outcome. In a world where the future was often uncertain and the stakes were astronomically high, these bizarre and often superstitious practices were not just idle curiosity. They were serious attempts to divine the will of God in the fate of a dynasty, reflecting the profound anxieties and hopes that surrounded the birth of a royal heir. Number 3. The protective power of royal garments. For medieval queens, clothing was far more than a matter of fashion or status. It was believed to be imbued with protective powers, a wearable shield against illness, misfortune, and malevolent magic. Every stitch, every color, every embellishment could carry symbolic weight, serving not just to adorn the royal body, but to safeguard the royal person. Queens, advised by their most trusted confidants, and perhaps even local wise women, understood that their garments were extensions of their aura, capable of deflecting harm and attracting good fortune. Certain hues were believed to possess specific magical or spiritual properties. Green, for instance, was widely associated with fertility and growth, making it a popular choice for queens hoping to conceive or to ensure a healthy pregnancy. While it was sometimes considered unlucky in other contexts due to its association with fairies or spirits, for queens seeking an heir, its life-giving symbolism often took precedence. Blue, on the other hand, was deeply tied to purity, truth, and the Virgin Mary. A queen might wear blue for important religious ceremonies, or during times of personal distress, believing it would bring divine favor and protection. Red, symbolizing power, passion, and vitality, was often worn for ceremonies of state or public appearances, projecting strength and authority, and perhaps also believed to ward off ill will by its vibrant intensity. Beyond color, specific charms, symbols, or even small physical objects were often sewn into the lining or hidden within the seams of royal garments. These could be small sachets filled with protective herbs like rue or rosemary believed to repel evil spirits or disease. Tiny, religious medallions, fragments of blessed cloth, or small pieces of parchment inscribed with prayers or magical verses might be discreetly stitched into a queen's gown, camisole, or even her nightwear. These hidden talismans were intensely personal, their presence known only to the queen and perhaps her most trusted lady-in-waiting, providing a secret layer of spiritual armor against unseen threats. The very materials of the garments were also believed to hold power. Silk, with its smooth, shimmering quality, was not just luxurious, but was sometimes believed to possess protective qualities. Perhaps due to its rarity and expense, marking it as a materiality worthy of royalty, Linen, being a natural fiber, was often associated with purity and cleanliness, while wool was for warmth and practicality. The craftsmanship itself was also a form of protection. Elaborate embroidery, particularly depicting religious scenes, saints, or heraldic symbols, was not just decorative. These intricate patterns were believed to weave a protective net around the wearer. Each stitch imbued with good intentions and symbolic power. Specific articles of clothing were also singled out for their protective qualities. The chemise, or shift worn closest to the skin, was a prime candidate for holding hidden charms. A queen might sleep in a specially blessed chemise, believing it would protect her from nightmares or nocturnal visitations from evil spirits. Even a queen's shoes or gloves might have small, symbolic elements incorporated into their design, providing subtle, all-encompassing protection from head to toe. Consider Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most influential women of the medieval era. Her wardrobe would have been extensive and exquisite, reflecting her status as a powerful queen of France and later England. While no specific inventory of her charmed garments exists, the widespread nature of such beliefs suggests that a woman of her prominence, constantly navigating political intrigue and personal danger, would have undoubtedly utilized every available means of protection, including those embedded within her attire. Available means of protection. In Colby, her journeys across Europe, her pregnancies, and her political struggles would have reinforced the need for such tangible defenses. The belief in the protective power of garments was not just a personal quirk of queens. It reflected a wider medieval worldview where the material and spiritual worlds were intimately intertwined. Objects were not seen as inert. They could be imbued with intention, blessed by divine power, or cursed by malevolent forces. For a queen whose body was also a political entity, every aspect of her presentation, down to the hidden elements of her clothing, served a purpose. It was a silent declaration of power, a plea for divine favor, and a deeply personal shield against the myriad dangers of medieval life, from illness to assassination. These garments, silently holding their charms, were a testament to the belief that the queen could actively shape her own destiny, not just through political maneuvering but through the strategic use of sacred and symbolic objects worn close to her skin. They were a constant, comforting presence, a reminder that she was watched over not just by her guards, but by unseen forces, channeling power and protection with every regal movement. Number 2. Warding off witches and the evil eye. The medieval world, even for its most powerful queens, was permeated by a deep-seated fear of malevolent forces, witches, sorcerers, and the insidious evil eye. The belief that jealous rivals or ill-wishers could inflict harm through curses, spells, or simply a malicious glance was pervasive. For a queen whose position was constantly under scrutiny and whose life was a magnet for envy, protection against such unseen threats was not a matter of idle fancy, but a serious concern. Queens and their households employed a variety of rituals, objects, and gestures. Some overtly religious, others deeply superstitious. To ward off these perceived dangers, one of the most common protective substances, salt, associated with purity, preservation, and divine covenant, was believed to have a strong power against evil. It might be sprinkled around the queen's chambers, particularly near windows and doors, to prevent malevolent spirits or curses from entering. Small sachets of salt could be sewn into garments or placed under the bed for nocturnal protection. It was a simple, readily available substance, yet its symbolic power was immense, acting as a barrier against unseen forces. Iron was another widely trusted protective material. Its strength in association with weaponry made it a potent ward against evil. Horseshoe nails, pieces of iron, or even iron rings were believed to repel witches and ward off the evil eye. Queen might have iron objects placed in her stable, her nursery, or even a small piece incorporated into her personal effects. The clanging of iron was also thought to break spells. This practical, everyday metal was elevated to a magical barrier against spiritual harm. Specific herbs were also frequently employed for their protective properties. Rue, rosemary, and juniper were commonly believed to ward off evil spirits and witches. These herbs might be hung in bundles around the queen's rooms, burned as incense, or even carried in small pouches. The strong scent of some of these herbs was thought to cleanse the air of negative energies and repel malevolent presences. Queens seeking to ensure the health of her children might have these herbs placed near their cradles or in their nurseries. Gestures and spoken charms were also vital components of protection. The mano cornuta, or horn-hand gesture, index and pinky fingers extended, thumb holding down middle fingers, was widely used in some regions to ward off the evil eye, particularly in southern Europe. Queen might subtly employ this gesture when she felt threatened by a jealous gaze or a suspicious individual. Personal prayers spoken repeatedly or inscribed on small amulets were also a powerful defense. These were often Christian prayers, but their use in a ritualistic manner, sometimes combined with specific times or intentions, lent them a protective, almost magical quality beyond mere devotion. The concept of luck and ill luck was intrinsically tied to the idea of curses and blessings. A queen experiencing a string of misfortunes, illness, failed pregnancies, political setbacks, might suspect she was targeted by a malevolent influence. In such cases, she would seek out individuals believed capable of identifying and counteracting curses. These might be learned clerics, respected, wise women, or even, in more desperate circumstances, those who operated on the fringes of society, offering counterspells and protective charms. Queens like Isabella of Castile, renowned for her strong Catholic faith, would have relied heavily on religious practices for protection. But even within a framework of piety, a vast array of superstitious beliefs could coexist. The belief in demons and the devil was very real, and any affliction that could not be explained by natural means might be attributed to demonic influence or witchcraft. Therefore, holy water, blessed objects, and the invocation of saints were also powerful tools against evil. Queen might insist on having holy water sprinkled in her bedchamber every night, or wear a crucifix blessed by a saint, believing these offered spiritual protection against unseen adversaries. The fear of witches became particularly pronounced towards the later medieval period and into the early modern era, leading to widespread hunts and persecution. While queens were rarely accused of witchcraft themselves, they were certainly among those most concerned about its purported effects. They understood that their vulnerability to curses was heightened by their visibility and the envy their power inspired. For a medieval queen, the constant vigilance against witches and the evil eye was a hidden burden. It was a battle fought in the shadows, using an array of seemingly simple objects and actions, yet imbued with profound belief. These protective measures were not just quaint folk remedies. They were serious attempts to safeguard the queen's life, her lineage, and her kingdom from malevolent forces that were believed to be very real and very dangerous. They provided a sense of control in a world where unseen threats lurked around every corner, offering a crucial psychological shield against the anxieties of royal power. Number 1. The curious case of post-mortem practices. Even in death, medieval queens were subject to an elaborate set of beliefs and rituals, practices far beyond simple burial. These post-mortem customs were steeped in superstition, driven by anxieties about the afterlife, the preservation of memory, and the enduring power of the royal body. The handling of a queen's remains was not just a matter of tradition. It was believed to influence her soul's journey, her legacy, and even the future stability of the realm. One of the most striking and widespread practices among royalty was the separate burial of the heart. Upon a queen's death, her body would often undergo a process of evisceration, where her internal organs, particularly the heart, were removed. The heart would then be embalmed, often preserved in spices and alcohol, and placed in its own ornate casket or reliquary. This heart casket would then be buried in a separate location from the rest of the body, often in a church or abbey that held particular significance to the queen or her family. The main body would then be buried in a royal necropolis like Westminster Abbey for English queens, or St. Denis Basilica for French queens. The reasons behind this practice were multifaceted and deeply rooted in medieval beliefs. The heart was often considered the seat of the soul, emotion, and memory. Burying it separately, especially in a place of personal devotion or familial origin, was believed to ensure a piece of the queen's essence remained tied to that location, providing spiritual protection. It was also a way for queens to express loyalty or affection to multiple places. A queen who had ruled in one kingdom, but originated from another, might choose to have her heart sent back to her homeland, connecting her spiritual essence to her roots. Even in death, it was a tangible way to honor multiple allegiances and to ensure a spiritual presence in more than one sacred space. Beyond the heart, other organs might also be buried separately, or the entire body would undergo extensive embalming. This process, while intended to preserve the body for a lengthy funeral procession, was also deeply connected to beliefs about resurrection and the soul's eventual reunion with its physical form. While gruesome by modern standards, the careful preparation of the royal corpse reflected a profound respect for the earthly vessel and a belief in its ultimate spiritual significance. Death masks were also sometimes created, not just for artistic representation, but to capture the exact likeness of the deceased, preserving their identity for eternity. The rituals surrounding the deathbed itself were also imbued with superstition. It was believed that the manner of death and the prayers and ceremonies performed around the dying queen could significantly impact her passage into the afterlife. Candles were often lit, believed to ward off evil spirits and guide the soul. Priests would perform extreme unction and offer blessings, ensuring the queen was in a state of grace. The dying queen's final words were often seen as prophetic or deeply meaningful, scrutinized by those present for any hidden wisdom or omens. The physical placement of the queen's tomb within a church or cathedral was also highly significant. Proximity to saints' relics or to the tombs of revered ancestors was believed to confer spiritual benefits, aiding the queen's soul in purgatory or ensuring a more direct path to heaven. Elaborate effigies on tombs were not just monuments. They were meant to serve as eternal prayers, with the sculpted figure perpetually in supplication, thereby helping the soul. The inscription on the tomb, the imagery, and the very design of the effigy were all carefully chosen to reflect the queen's piety, her status, and her hopes for salvation. Consider the case of Queen Eleanor of Castile, wife of King Edward I of England. After her death, her body was taken on a long journey from Harvey to Westminster Abbey, and at each stop an elaborate stone cross, known as an Eleanor cross, was erected. While a demonstration of royal grief and devotion, this procession and the creation of these crosses were also deeply symbolic, marking her passage and creating sacred spaces in her memory, essentially extending her protective influence across the landscape. Even after her death, it reinforced the belief that the Queen's essence, her power, did not simply vanish with her last breath. The handling of royal regalia and personal possessions after a queen's death also carried superstitious weight. Specific items might be buried with her, ensuring her continued status in the afterlife, or distributed to important religious institutions as bequests intended to secure prayers for her soul. These acts were not just charitable, they were a form of spiritual investment, a belief that material actions in this life could directly influence the eternal fate of the deceased. For medieval queens, death was not the end of their story, but a transition fraught with both spiritual peril and opportunity. The elaborate postmortem practices surrounding their bodies, from the separate burial of hearts to the careful placement of their tombs, were all deeply intertwined with prevailing superstitions about the soul, the afterlife, and the enduring power of royalty. They were desperate attempts to control the uncontrollable, to secure eternal salvation, and to ensure that even in death, a queen's legacy and influence continued to resonate, leaving a lasting imprint on the world she left behind.